On July 14th of 1933, Adolf Hitler banned all political parties in Nazi Germany other than his own. Duh, you may say, he was a totalitarian dictator. It's exactly the sort of thing he would do. But there are two key points to bear in mind here. First, to become a totalitarian dictator, it's not enough to have the malevolent intention. You also have to succeed in seizing power. And the second one is that back in 1933, totalitarian dictator was not a familiar conceptual category, and Hitler simply one more example of it. Yes, Mussolini had engaged in some windy philosophizing about the concept of totalitarianism, but that seemed more comic opera than genuinely serious. And there were a number of warning signs about the kind of things Hitler was trying to do, but people ignored them. And that's how it was that ultimately we could look back and say, well, duh, of course he'd do that. Now, banning all political parties was just part of something they called the Glacial Tongue. That is to say, it's sort of coordination, this dangerously antiseptic word, in which the state took charge of everything from churches to trade unions to chess clubs. Everything was brought into its embrace. The federal structure of the German government was subsumed in the structure of the Nazi Party. And instead of having a whole bunch of voluntary civic organizations to which people might belong, everybody was meant to join. Well, if they were boys, the Hitler Youth, and if they were girls, the League of German Maidens. Now, how was Hitler able to do all this? He was elected Chancellor of Germany in 1933 in a semi-rigged election after the Reichstag fire. But he didn't have even a majority. He had to form a coalition. And yet, he was able to buffalo legislators into passing the so-called Enabling Act. That was in March of 1933, that said that from now on, the executive, that is to say, Hitler, could make laws instead of the legislature having to do it. And from that point on, of course, he could do anything he wanted, including banning other political parties, and making himself, the chancellor, the successor to the desperately ill and aging President Hindenburg, which incidentally, the Enabling Act specifically said he couldn't do. But once you give lawmaking authority to the executive, it doesn't matter what the legislature had said or what it might be going to say. And, Hitler analogies are badly overdone, and you want to be extremely wary of them. I've always resented the fact that Quebec nationalists call ganging up on René Lévesque in 1981 in the constitutional negotiations the Night of the Long Knives. The real Night of the Long Knives saw German statesmen and some of Hitler's former associates brutally and extra-legally murdered. In the 1981 Night of the Long Knives, nobody was assaulted. Nobody had their constitutional rights taken away. They just had people get fed up with them and go in another direction. Not what I particularly agree with, but it was not Nazism. On the other hand, it is true that despite every internet argument ending with a Hitler comparison, generally spurious, we are blind to the emergence of figures with a Hitler-like mentality and Hitler-like behavior in the political system abroad. We treat the rule of law too lightly. And one reason we do that is that, as in Weimar Germany, there's a certain level of scorn directed at bourgeois democracy, at negative, purely formal rights, at the concept that society does best when individuals get to make their own decisions. And Hitler's opponents had trouble rallying the public when he banned political parties and started bringing everything into the embrace of the state, because they themselves had ridiculed the system that they were now desperately trying to get the public to defend. And while there isn't the slightest prospect of totalitarianism or Hitler in Canada, I would point out that we are making some of the same mistakes that Germans did make in the period that's under discussion. For instance, ceding too much rule-making authority to the executive branch instead of the legislature, being too dismissive of the achievements of the past in creating a working democratic system in which people are, by and large, trusted to manage their own affairs, provided they don't use force and fraud against other people. It doesn't mean, as I say, that anything resembling Nazism is looming here, but it does mean that if you ignore the warning signs in a system, one day you'll look back and you say to yourself, gee, it was really obvious that we were headed for trouble. Why didn't we see that? And by the time you say, duh, it's obvious, that's exactly the sort of thing they would do. It is, as the Germans found out, far too late.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.